Hello, everyone, and welcome to another K6 Office Hours. I'm Nicole van der Hoeven, and I'm with two of my colleagues, Paul Baylog, and someone you've seen before as well, Tom Miseur.
Hello.
Well, Paul, I think that you haven't been on at the same time as Tom, but Tom has been on to talk about a bunch of things, XK6 browser, Hasura, and testing with GraphQL, and I feel like I'm missing something else.
Maybe web script debugging with a proxy. I think
Yes,
that might have
There
been
you go.
another
yes.
one.
How to, different ways to different ways to analyze K6 results and troubleshoot scripts. Yeah. Well, that was really good. But for those of the people that are watching who have not watched any of those, can you tell us who you are and what you do at K6?
Sure. Yeah. I work on our professional services team, so I spend a lot of time helping our customers with their scripts. Sometimes writing them on their behalf, sometimes just helping them get their scripts working initially. Setting up projects from the beginning and trying to make sure that they're going to be easy to maintain in the long run, which is one of the topics that we'll be talking about today. How to start off a project in such a way that it can organically increase in size over time without becoming massively complicated and difficult to maintain. But yeah, I've been with K6 for a year and a few months now, and so yeah, that's my summary.
I can't imagine that you're ever any busy at all. I mean, it's you're on a small team of people that are helping out the clients of our cloud service. So yeah, you got to be stretched pretty thin.
Yeah, especially with
No,
the
I'm sure he has
Grafana
loads of
acquisition.
time. Like all one of the people that do professional services, that's Tom.
Well,
There's
on
so
that
many
note,
people on the team.
we are actually hiring for another.
What?
So
Oh,
it's a
hey,
good
oh,
opportunity
segue.
to
I
plug
wasn't
it.
ready with the banner. Here we go.
This
Continue,
is always
please.
a shock. Yes.
Yeah, so the sort of history of that is before I joined, we didn't have any sort of in-house professional services capacity. Um, we wanted to bring that in-house because of the fact that in that capacity we learn a lot about how our users are using the tool, and keeping that knowledge in-house is very useful to then feed that information back to our development team. And we've seen quite a lot of demand for professional services, particularly with our larger enterprise customers, and so we're looking to bolster our forces on that front. So yeah,
Awesome.
make sure to check out the job posting.
Yeah.
I think it's a solution architect, I believe that it's we call it.
Yes.
So
I just saw it before the show as well. I know that your official title is technical specialist, but actually, I think it should be senior dog fooder because I think of the entire company, you eat our own dog food more often than anyone. Would you agree?
yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah. It was nice to see Thomas. It was last week, or was it the week before?
Yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
last week, talking about dog fooding as well. So it's been a recurring topic in the last few weeks here. I didn't really. I had to look up the definition because I'd heard it a few times, but I wasn't exactly sure what it meant. But I was glad to find that it was what I thought it was.
Well, I'm not really sure where it comes from, but I guess for people out there, when we talk about dog fooding, I don't know where it started. It doesn't make any sense now that I'm explaining it. But there's this general idea of dog food being the product or the service that we're building. And then eating your own dog food has become something that means you're confident enough in what you've built that you would use it as
Yep.
a real user yourself. And in this industry, it's also about testing your product in the real world, right? Because there's some companies that might not be confident enough in their own stuff that they would look at their own product. They use other products so it doesn't ever get back to the developers when they find bugs, which is actually a good thing. Oh,
Yeah.
I guess Aditya Narayan Nayak says, yesterday I published a blog on getting started with K6. That's awesome. If you post it in the comments, you can make sure that people see it as well. But yes, Tom, so you are actually a performance tester, and I believe you were doing this even well, I know you were doing this way before you joined K6.
Yeah, I actually started off with a little at a little company called Facilita in the UK. So they built a product called Forecast Studio, and it eventually became Eggplant Performance when they were acquired by Eggplant, who are now Keysight, I believe. So I've been using that tool for about 14 years or so before I joined K6, and so most of my experience with that tool. But a lot of things in the load testing world, very translatable. The knowledge you gain with one tool can most definitely be applied to other tools. They all have very similar kind of constructs and concepts. So yeah.
So you said in Slack, in our internal Slack channel, that you'd created a bunch of script or a test suite, I guess, for testing K6 Cloud at the protocol level. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes. And
What was the motivation for it? Did you get inspired by what Thomas did last week, or was
well,
it something you were already doing?
funnily enough, I'd started that 1 or 2 days before Thomas gave his demo internally. So we were, I guess, both thinking about it at the same time. I think maybe someone said dog fooding somewhere in a Slack channel, and I thought, yeah, maybe this is worth doing, because at the time I was also just messing around with the idea of us having starter templates for new projects, and so I created a few different templates that you could basically just copy and paste into your local system and have K6 scripts already set up in a certain opinionated way. But I then wanted to take one of those templates and actually use it in earnest on a sizable project. The idea with the templates was that you could easily expand the scope of the testing without it becoming an unmaintainable mess. And so I figured the two would work quite well together. Our K6 Cloud app is pretty complex, under the hood. There's a lot of different API calls, all asynchronous JavaScript stuff. So you to do that without it becoming a massive long mess of script, you really do need to think quite carefully about how to organize things. So the two, went hand in hand quite well. So
Can you
Yeah,
show
I was
us the
definitely.
starter? Sorry, go on, Paul.
No, I was gonna say I was definitely surprised when I saw the name in an alert that the GitHub repository was created. I was kind of like, what?
yeah, I'll show off the actual dog fooding project itself, but if you like, I can show you what the starter templates look like.
Sure, I'll add that.
Okay, so I actually made this public yesterday after thinking about it. It's probably okay to share. It is just underneath my own personal GitHub, but you should be able to access this URL if you want to have a look on your machine. So basically, I've got 3 different templates. One is called Httpx, another called K6Chai.js, and another just called Vanilla. And they all share a similar sort of structure. And if I just open up this Vanilla one, so Vanilla is basically using our built-in APIs, nothing beyond that really. So it's just a combination of JavaScript and our built-in functionality. And the general format looks like this, and is common across all the other templates as well. The main entry point script is just called main.js. And then there's 3 separate folders. And so this first common folder, it's really just to a place to store common functions. So quite quite quickly. I think in a project you'll encounter a need to suddenly create a function that you want to be able to use for from all of your scripts. This is actually random in between, which is something we provide in JSLib as well, but it's a one-liner to fetch to generate a random integer between a minimum and a maximum value. Quite a useful one. It's a bit horrible to write out this line of code every time you want to do something like randomly retrieving a value from even an array. So it's convenient just to have this kind of a function, and it's exported, so it means we can basically import it in wherever we feel we need it. So it makes sense to keep that in its own location. And this config folder, that's the next folder then. I've become a fan of separating out test config from the entry point script. So if I just go into the main.js script here, there's the exported options object. It's obviously very key for case 6. It allows you to define what kind of test you want to run, how many virtual users, the length of the test, if you're using stages to ramp up virtual users. And so if you're so the options object can grow quite significantly, especially if you're using multiple scenarios. So the bigger your project is, the bigger this options object is going to be. So I decided, and I'm pretty much going to do this for all projects going forward, I think, is to just have the test config reside in a JSON file, and using object assign to merge it with something that I might want to still include in the entry point script. So settings like this where it's a Boolean flag, you probably just need to set this once. It's probably always going to be set to the same value, and so you might still want to keep that one in your entry point script, but the rest is coming from this test.json file, just using object assign to basically merge the two together. And so if you have a look at that, it's very similar to what you would see normally in your options object. So here there's just a single scenario with these scenario specific settings. And so
Can you tell us a little,
yeah.
Sorry, I was
Go
just going
ahead.
to ask, can you tell us a little bit more about why you decided that you should separate the config from the rest of the script?
Yeah, I think when I like the idea of having JSON files that are likely to change. I'm not so keen on making configuration changes in that require then JavaScript code to be modified. I think it's pretty common pattern for that to be the case. In past projects, I found myself with multiple duplicates of the entry point script, and I think it just looks a lot nicer if you have multiple different test JSON file. So you might have a JSON file for a different environment where you're passing in different base URLs for those different environments. So you can easily just have a test for staging, a test for pre-prod or whatever. So it just, especially if you're keeping things under source control, I think people might appreciate if you're just modifying a config file as opposed to a JavaScript file, which might then require a bit more scrutiny.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and it makes sense, right? It's just about modularizing the script a bit so that you don't have to change the big majority of the script every time. So, like, I think that when you're creating the script, it may be okay to have everything in a single script, in a single file, but then, like you were saying, the more things that script does, and the more often you change it to go against another environment, then the more you're going to feel the pain of having it all in one place. And you definitely don't want to copy the entire script and just make a duplicate of it. That would be that would quickly get unwieldy if you have multiple copies and each one has to be changed if something changes in the application. And I feel like the thing after you create the script in the first place, the thing that changes the most is actually the config.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and there's quite a lot of things that you might change in that config. Maybe, if you're using the K6 cloud, you might have different cloud APM configurations. But I think the one that's common across, regardless of whether you're using K6 open source or the cloud, is that you'll be testing different environments pretty soon, and just being able to set that in test config, the base URL is very convenient. And okay, so the
We did
last
have a question just
yeah,
came
go ahead.
in about how to use the config file or a data file for a test with cloud.
Sure. Yeah, it actually works just the same as it does locally. So, when you use the K6 Cloud command to run a script, you're not just uploading that one script. Everything in the project or any other scripts referenced by your main entry point script will automatically get bundled up. And it's not just scripts; it also includes files that you open. And so the open function will parse that and will understand that this test.json file also needs to be archived up and sent to the cloud.
Right.
So that you would be able to run it in the cloud as if you were running it locally. So it works regardless.
Cool.
Okay, so if I just go into the scripts folder, then that's the last folder in this vanilla template. So that's where the actual automation scripts, what we typically think of as K6 scripts, would reside. So you'll have your usual sort of sleep and check functions being used. It's where you'll have your HTTP calls and validations going on. And so these are exported functions, and these would then could then be executed directly from a given scenario using the exec property here. So that's how those two are sort of linked together. There is there's a slightly different version of this template that I'm thinking about that sort of separates out automation scripts with another sort of abstraction, but I might talk about that a bit later on when I show the dog fooding project to understand why that might be necessary or desirable. But yeah, if you look at the main entry point script, it's only 16 lines long. I don't even need to have this export default function, which is usually something that K6 will tell you is needed. But the fact that I have an exported function in the script file here, so I've made sure to export function script1 here. As long as I then re-export that function in the entry point script, this script1 function becomes available. And so, and because I have it defined in the scenario, I'm saying that I'm going to run script1 using the exec property. That's enough for K6 to not need to have the export default function in the main entry point script. So with this, you can reduce your entry point script to a very few lines of code, which is also another thing that I was kind of keen on doing. I'm primarily using the entry point script to set some global variables. So pause min, pause max are being used to determine your sleep think times that you want to use, and make it very easy to modify the lower and upper bound for your sleep times. And this pattern here is one I've used quite a lot as well recently. So making it possible to feed in your variables through environment variables. And if none were set, it'll just default to using whatever is hard-coded into the script here. So we'll use a range of 1 to 5 seconds here in the sleep times. And the pattern I use there for sleep is typically this. So we'll sleep for a random duration between pause min and pause max. The other templates in here, they're very similar. One just, instead of using the built-in HTTP client to do HTTP get, HTTP post, it uses Httpx, which is a very useful library that I find myself using a lot. It's something that our CTO wrote. It's so cool to have, C-levels contributing code. It's one of the reasons why I love K6. Yesterday, I found myself linking someone a gist that our CEO created, and I was like, this is crazy. So that was very fun. But basically, HTTPX is just a bit of an enhanced version of an HTTP client. What you can do with it is set the base URL and set global headers and even a global request timeout. So we have a 60-second timeout by default. If you wanted to modify that to some other value, you just do that once instead of having to repeat that for each individual HTTP request that you make, which is unfortunately what you have to do with a built-in client. That might change at some point in the future. I do hope at some point we do have global options for things like that, particularly headers. It does help to cut down the amount of code if you're able to set some global headers, because you'll find that a lot of the headers that you'll see in a script, particularly one generated by Httpx, there's going to be quite a lot of code that's basically duplicated lines of code for setting headers. And it's very easy to use. It's all hosted online, so you can even see the code behind HTTPX if you just navigate to the URL. But yeah, you basically just initialize a HTTPX session. It's usually what I call the variable. And then later on, if I have a look at one of the scripts in here, you can see it's very similar to the code that you would use to make a GET request. So instead of http.get, you're writing session.get or whatever you decided to name your HTTPX object. There's some other things in here. I've found myself using this kind of verify response function quite a bit to perform response validations. So you pass in the response object that you get back from your HTTP request, and you can say things like, I'm expecting the HTTP status code to be 200, and I'm expecting some content to be inside of the response body. That's actually optional. You can pick and choose one of these two or both for validating. And if there's a problem, you can have K6 call our fail function behind the scenes if you set this to true. And if you want to print the response body for a bit more debug information for when you do get something unexpected, you just have to set print on error to true as well to get that extra logging. So it's sort of a generic reusable function for performing response validation. Because it's generic and reusable, it obviously makes sense to store it in the common folder utils script in this case, where you can then see what exactly is going on with that. There's quite a bit going on, but behind the scenes, it's creating checks for each different verification that is being performed. And the last one, which is sort of a hot off the press library that we've got. So K6chai.js, again, something our CTO has been working on. It provides a different way of performing response validations that is maybe a bit more familiar to those coming from the automated functional testing world. So if I just show the script for that, you'll note here we're importing describe and expect functions from the library, and they allow you to write code in this kind of style. So here's our response object that we're getting from the HTTP GET request, and then we have a chain of expect statements, and all of this is inside this describe function callback. And so describe is very similar to group. If you've ever used groups before, so basically anything that happens within describe will have, so wherever you're generating metrics, those metrics will reference, there'll be a tag or a label for the name, with the name of the group or that those metrics were emitted within. So basically it allows you to define your test case. In this case, it's called get public crocodiles, and then we'll perform some validation on not only the response status code, so we're making sure that the response status is equal to HTTP 200. The next one here is a check to make sure that the response has a valid JSON body. So if we're expecting a JSON document back, this will can be used to validate that. The good thing about this library is if this first expect statement, if that assertion fails, the rest of the assertions will be skipped. And so instead of seeing 3 failures because it was not the expected status code, you'll just see 1 error. Makes it much easier to debug problems later on. But yeah, it reads quite well. You know, it's more English-like, I guess.
Yeah.
So some people might be more familiar with that style.
I actually
Yeah, it's-
didn't know that Powell had written this, and I didn't know about Chai either, but it reminds me very much of Mocha, and that's probably intentional. I don't know, for some reason in automation testing, there's like this theme of coffee and Java and like tea. I don't know why. But I also wanted to shout out something that one of our contributors, someone from the K6 community, wrote. His name is Ivan Skiba. We've had him on office hours before, and he wrote this test runner for K6 that was inspired by Mocha. So there's definitely a lot of ways to get this like describe, expect kind of syntax. And Rose seems to be appreciating this. Rose Landroche says this is really cool. SJ has a question. How do you typically go about managing your sessions per VUs? I think K6 clears out the cookie after every iteration.
Yeah, I think there's an option to persist cookies beyond the first iteration. I imagine that's an option. No cookie
Yeah, I
reset.
believe that there is one too. Just trying to find it in the docs too.
Yeah, I think it's
If
this
you,
no cookie reset.
for those who don't know, k6.io/docs is a really good place to start because then you can just search for it. And there's a lot of stuff there. The people that write the docs are mostly our developers, actually. So, you know, it's useful docs, not marketing docs.
Yeah, what was the other part of that question?
Um,
Yeah,
how to
managing
manage your
sessions
sessions per VUs, I think clears out the cookie after every iteration.
Yeah, that's definitely the main thing to think about. I guess I was thinking of it in terms of having different. So Httpx, that library allows you to have different, multiple of these sessions, and each one can have its own set of headers. And so I guess it's not quite the same question. But yeah, each virtual user could have different sessions. It's not the same question. So I think with cookies, I think that's really the main thing to think about. The other thing might be caching of resources. I don't know if there's something for that. You know, in the second, I think we automatically clear the browser or the equivalent of the browser cache each iteration as well. So you typically don't tend to see many 304 responses, 304 not modified. But that's another thing perhaps to think about. Connection reuse might be another one as well, whether or not we should reuse TCP connections. Connection reuse as well, keep alive. Lots of options.
Yeah, I think the default for K6 is always not to keep that stuff, just because I guess that's like the safer option. To present a slightly worse picture of performance is better than slightly better. If you have to choose something that's slightly inaccurate, it's better to steer into it looking worse than it is. But most everything you can change. So if you're particularly testing for if the scenario that you're testing involves users that are returning users, like returning customers or something, that could be a really good use case for turning some of these things, some of the default behavior off, and caching things, and also saving the cookies.
Mm-hmm. So how does it look when the templates are put to use? It's a good time to show the dog fooding
Yeah.
project. All right, let's see. I thought I had it
Yeah.
open already.
And it's awesome that you did make that a public repository so everybody can get to that. That's except for this one.
Yeah, this one's this one's still private. Yeah, it
Well,
is the
also
setup.
because please try not to load test K6 Cloud.
Yeah, yeah.
This is also our livelihood. We do have test sites for that if you want to test it.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. I really like our test API site. It's quite useful for trying out various different things. Very typical API sort of endpoints to test, and we even have some script examples towards the bottom of that main page to show you, some code examples that are interacting with the site. So if you need some test system to just play with, this is one option. The other is this e-commerce website. It's WordPress running WooCommerce. So it's got more of that e-commerce type of flow. So it is just a demo store. You're not going to suddenly receive orders, but you can actually complete orders here as well. So if you want to go through the whole end-to-end of your typical cart, adding stuff to the cart, and performing a checkout and getting an order ID back, that's a very good sort of example of what you might need to do if you're working in the e-commerce space. So have at it on this site. It does not handle many users, so which is kind of on purpose. The CPU usage on this single machine that's hosting this gets pretty destroyed, but that's part of what you want to see, like what happens when you actually put something under load. So yeah, those are some demo sites. But yeah, this is I call the project K6 Purina after the dog food brand. I just got a
I
dog
love that
about,
name.
yeah, I got a dog 7 months ago, and now intimately familiar with dog food, which I didn't think I would be. So yeah, and so it's using the template with a slight addition of a scenarios folder. So before we had common, config, and scripts. Now there's also scenarios. So I wonder if it makes more sense to show it in my editor or not. I don't know if it's cleaner here, but
Oh no,
yeah.
Tom Powell is watching us. He says
Oh no,
that script example on the test site needs to be refreshed. It can be so much shorter with the new libraries.
that's a good point. It's a good point. Yeah, have it used Chai.js probably. We should look at
I think he
updating
was
that.
talking about the test API that you're showing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a test API as well, so that's fair enough. This is Naveen Kumar from QA Insights asking, is Purina public repo? Unfortunately not. We are trying not to encourage people to load test K6 Cloud, though we are showing it here. Tom's showing some of the scripts that he used for it.
Yeah, I think it might be useful to see an example project that makes use of these templates. I think I've been
Yeah.
hosting a repo for that WooCommerce website that I showed briefly as well. It does not use that template, so it's now a bit out of date. I actually want to update this repo to include some of the sort of best practice things I've just been talking about. Separating things, config from code, and so I might take it upon myself to do that. I think it would be useful to have another version of this repo with the templates. But yeah, unfortunately, I can't really do the same with our this K6 Purina dog fooding project. But I'm happy to show you sort of what it looks like right now. So as before, we have the comments folder with some utility functions. There's not too many of those currently, just one called replace values. I'm using it throughout to make some replacements of dynamic IDs into just some kind of placeholder. It helps to group URLs together when there's dynamic IDs in the URL. And there's also that verify response function that I showed earlier on. Here you can see examples of where I have multiple config files. So I have one for the cloud. I'm not going to open that in case there's any credentials in there for the cloud. But basically, you can see, I can easily switch between configs just by changing the name of the config file that I'm feeding in. This is the main entry point script. A few more global variables being set up and defaulting to values in here if the environment variables aren't passed in. Creating two different Httpx sessions. One is for the app itself. The other is for our API server, which has actually a different set of headers. So being able to set global headers just means I don't have to do any of that later on when I'm actually making the HTTP request, and that dramatically cuts down on the script code. Nothing else new in there. I have, so one of the things that I did here was I just have a single scenario, a scenario folder. Right now, the only scenario that I've added is for opening a random test run. So that's sort of the end-to-end flow. And open random test run consists of 4 functions. They should map pretty well to what the actual user will be doing. So they'll be navigating to the homepage first. It'll be your app.k6.io. Then the user performs a login, and then they'll open a project, and then they'll open a test run. And so a scenario, that's how I see a scenario. It's that really high level, what are the different steps the user's executing. And so each of these functions is being brought in from the scripts, and there's actually quite a lot of different scripts. They're organized by the area where they're relevant. So on the home page, one of the things you can do is navigate to the home page, and so this is what that script looks like. It's very concise as a result of the way things have been set up here. We're just describing using describe, which is the equivalent of group more or less, but using K6.js to give the test case a name. So navigate to homepage is the name of the test case. We're just going to make a request to the base URL. The rest of the URL doesn't need to go in here as a result of using Httpx to set the base URL. So again, you just have to put the relative path. It cuts down on the amount of code you're writing. Not significantly, but I think it still looks quite nice to do it like that. And then again, using the expect library to verify that the status code is 200. And again, a sleep statement where we're picking a random pause delay between minimum and max values. So that's, you'll find, most of these look very similar to that. Submit login is a bit more involved. There's a lot more going on. This is a sequence of HTTP requests basically that happen behind the scenes. Each of these is essentially one request being made, and all of these functions are being imported from scripts in this API folder. This is where I kind of want to call out Github Copilot, which I've been making heavy use of, and I love Github Copilot. I've been raving about it in our internal Slack every time I'm working on a project and it does something amazing. I can't help but tell others, like, this is incredible. Why aren't more people using this? But just to say, there is still a wait list. I got on it. I got access to it pretty quickly, but basically, it's your AI pair programmer. It uses AI to kind of guess what code you're going to write. Works very well with K6 scripts, JavaScript in particular. And so I meant to show you the screen here. So yeah, if you want to sign up, just go to copilot.github.com, and I think they open it up to pretty much to everyone really, but you do need to be on a wait list for a short amount of time. But with it, I just wanted to show an example of what it does. So in this particular script, I've got a function here called getLoadZones, and it has this URL that we're navigating to, and it has all of this other code. Now, if I just put a new line in here, write the word export as if I'm going to create a new function here, it's auto-suggesting that I want to create a function called getLoadZone. So instead of getLoadZones, I'm getting just maybe an individual load zone. So I've used tab to accept that. And I just waited a little bit, and check it out. It's just given me all of this code to autocomplete. What's crazy is what it's done to the URL. I'm not sure if this is actually a valid URL, but it gets pretty close. So I might just need to go in here, and maybe it's singular case here on load zone or something like that. But I found in some of the other places, it basically just auto-completed exactly how I needed it to be. All these expect statements where I'm performing assertions, that's all as it should be as well. It's an options request that is then followed by a get request, and that's all in here as well. It just blew my mind.
I also love Copilot.
Yeah.
I use it like the way that you're saying, with kind of like an autocomplete, but I also notice that sometimes if I'm not sure how to do something, I can just put even comments. Like I start a comment and say import CSV, and then it fills in the comment and the actual code. I mean, yes, you're not doing it yourself, but really, like, is going to Google and then or searching for something in Stack Overflow, like, one could argue that that also isn't your own code. This just shortens the process, and definitely there's still some things that it suggests that aren't quite right. But that's why you still have to have a look at what you're doing. You can't just run things blindly.
Yeah, maybe that's what it's doing in the background. It's doing a query through
Yeah.
Stack Overflow and just copying. So
Oh,
Yeah.
there is something out there on Visual Studio. There's like an extension that does exactly that. It just pulls in the best answer from Stack Overflow into your code. It's kind of scary.
So GitHub
I'm sure it
Copilot
works
is actually it's actually in conjunction with a company called OpenAI based in San Francisco. They're the ones that made GPT-3. So they've been in the artificial intelligence game for a while. And yes, they're the first to acknowledge that artificial intelligence has its limits. There's a reason why they didn't make GPT-3 public, because when they started it, it parsed a lot of news and very quickly became racist and sexist.
Oh, yeah.
Because these artificial intelligences are only as good as the input that we give them, and as a society, maybe that's something we need to work on. Charlie says, yes, we need to talk about Copilot every live stream.
yeah.
Yeah, see, it's not just for like newbie developers. I mean, just because you're a developer doesn't mean you know every single language, and why should you have to memorize things exactly? As long as you know what to do, Copilot can help you get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, there was a question that slid into about the expect about working with regex.
Let's see. I guess I need some kind of example. The first value that you pass into expect is the thing you're wanting to operate on. So I guess maybe you would want to run a regex regular expression against that value somehow and get some kind of Boolean true false of whether or not the value matches the regex.
Yeah.
Might have to ask Powell if he's on the call.
Yeah. I mean, I was when you were showing the, I guess the Chai JS earlier, I was kind of wondering on some of the status checks as well, because you were explicitly checking to see if something was a 200. But I was wondering if it had a sort of a check to say, is successful. So that way, then anything that it's in the 200 block of statuses is considered, thumbs up. So
Right. Yep.
I remember we talked about this with the K6 developers, like the core K6 devs. We went back and forth about like when to call something a success or when it's passed, because sometimes when you're testing, the successful test returns an error. Like sometimes you are testing the error, so in that sense, it's successful, but it errored out. It's a little confusing. Oh, Powell's already responded. Yep. He's so fast.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. You can test regex apparently with expect.
There you go.
Yeah, and it looks like you can also do things with capture groups, which is pretty neat if you've ever done advanced
Mhm.
regex,
Ooh,
or
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's kind of nice.
yeah. Naveen Kumar also says most of my markdowns are auto-completed by Copilot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
really how
Taking
I see
over
it.
the world.
It's
yeah.
a time saver. I would conservatively estimate that it sped up the creation of the scripts in this particular project by at least 10%. It was
Hmm.
just, once you've written something once, the autocomplete will at least put the code there. You might then need to tweak it a little bit, but it's still much faster than writing things from scratch.
Yeah, now if Copilot could take care of those regular expression variables, that would be quite nice,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, not much more to say about this particular uh, um, repository. One of the things that it's helped me do is discover a few minor bugs. So, for example, it looks like we're making some duplicated API requests. There's nothing different in what we're sending, and so it does seem like it's not quite something that needs to be in there, and it could be a heavy hitting transaction. So this one, we're getting the test runs by test ID basically, and it's firing off multiple times, probably some minor client-side JavaScript bug. And I just wanted to point out, the way I created all of these scripts is from a recording, and it was in that recording that you could find those duplicated calls. And so, if I'll take the opportunity to plug working with scripts that are generated from a recording, or having recordings at your disposal, so you can accurately simulate what's actually happening in the browser. If you're just following API documentation, and then you might not be able to catch these kinds of bugs that could have a performance impact, especially if they are really heavy-hitting API requests that are being duplicated.
We got another comment about Copilot. You can also chat with AI and Copilot.
What?
Start with me, Colin.
Just
We've
in
got to try that.
just anywhere in script
I
code,
don't
or
know. Maybe.
let's see what I don't know.
Okay, maybe not.
Not sure. I've probably done
Maybe it
something
has to
wrong.
be a
Yeah,
comment or
comment.
something.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
actually,
pretty
I was
cool.
just, yeah, so I was just trying. I'm curious if you try putting in a comment, import CSV. Because for me, I tried it and it actually gave me the documentation link
Oh, really? Huh.
for
Yeah, it doesn't look
K6.
like it. Yeah, I I guess it's not giving it for me, but
Can you
yeah.
tab it and then enter? Just, I think it was on the next line.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
Oh, see, so with me it gives me the link, but for you it's actually starting to go and share how to do it with JSON. How awesome is that?
Yeah,
And I
I
mean
think
that
it's
looks legit.
yeah, I think it's basically copied. It seems to be aware of other code you've written, even in the same project. It's not just previous JavaScript code in some massive repository somewhere. I think it looks over your own code as you're writing it, and becomes aware of it from that point on. And so, yeah, the syntax, it got it completely correct. That's why it's really useful with K6.
Mm.
I'm using something called our definitely typed types library or integration. Not sure what to call it, but when I type certain K6 functions, I get some IntelliSense back that gives me this documentation. And so that's useful, but you wouldn't have the autocomplete that you might have had experience of in other languages. But with GitHub Copilot, you do. It might not always be correct, but it gets pretty close. Yeah, there we go.
So I'm just posting the link to the Intellisense extension for integration with K6.
Yeah,
It's like it's got TypeScript, the TypeScript type definition that is for VS Code and IntelliJ now.
You find it?
Oh, I posted it in the chat.
Oh, okay. Got it.
It's just intelligent code completion and docs.
Cool. I didn't know we had that article.
So you were talking about the reason that you were working off of a recording. I think that's I think that a lot of people might assume that since K6 just can create HTTP requests, a lot of, especially developers, are thinking, well, obviously, logically, you would create an HTTP request for the ones to hit the endpoints that you know exist. And while you can do it that way as well, I think, like in this case, you were saying that it hadn't exactly been set up the expected way. And those things are only going to come out in a recording. Like sometimes you get requests to resources that no longer exist, and you get 404s that nobody really pays attention to or notices until it comes back and fails a script because it returned a 404. But that's the sort of thing that you will miss if you're only testing the expected endpoints.
Yep. Yeah, and I've seen it happen a few times, and that's why I'm always keeping an eye on what actually happens in the browser. Obviously, that only applies to websites that you're testing. If you're not able to, sometimes you might be testing a mobile app. In that case, you can still record the HTTP from a mobile app, but it can get a bit more involved. Sometimes you're prevented from performing what is called a man-in-the-middle attack, where you're basically listening in on an HTTP conversation, which is usually what you do with proxy recording. And if you're not able to do that, then yeah, you have to depend on someone telling you this is what the app does, and you have to take their word for it. Still better than nothing, but ideally you would be able to see what the actual client that real users are going to be using, what that is actually doing. I see.
It's pretty cool that you already discovered a defect.
Yeah.
We have a question from SJ. Yeah, I found some examples of selecting users from a file randomly or based on scenario iteration numbers. Is there an option to cycle through the file from top to bottom repeatedly?
I believe there's probably a more convenient way to do that now that we have the execution module. I guess it depends on does each virtual user you run need its own set of data, or should it be one row per virtual user or something like that? I'm sure there is a way to do it. You can use the iteration index to cycle through things. I know it's an area that I think that there's been some discussions over having an API for dealing specifically with CSV files that would make it easier to do things like, say, each virtual user should have 10 rows from this file, whether or not you should cycle back to the top when you reach the bottom of the file, whether or not data is exhaustive. I don't know if that's the right word, but sometimes you'll have data that you cannot reuse more than once, and so you might want to set that up when you define how you want to access the data in the CSV. Yeah, one row per virtual user until it gets to the end, and then repeat. Yeah, I'm not sure I could show that right here, right now, but I can definitely try and put something together and share that with you.
Yeah, maybe email us at support@k6.io just so we definitely get back to you because I also feel like the library that I use for CSV files in K6 is Papa Parse, and I feel like I'm sure that there was some sort of option to make it circular, which is I think what SJ was talking about, but I can't find it right now.
Yeah, and I was also going to just mention that possibly in the community, search in the community forums. Somebody else has probably run into that or wants to do that, so yeah, can work together.
Yeah. I think there's a mega thread somewhere
I'm
where,
sure.
yeah, it was pretty challenging, especially on the cloud where we have multiple instances of K6. We do have this underscore VU magic variable that gives you a unique ID per virtual user, but only within a single instance of K6. You might have multiple instances, and that's why we decided to release the execution module, K6/execution. That gives you a globally unique ID and also various other identifiers for other things you might want to have, like the iteration number. Again, I think that one already existed as well, but yeah. And with it, you can do things that you couldn't do before. And I think that's mentioned in that mega thread somewhere that finally we have this execution module and all is well in the world. So yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So the K6, the execution module that he's talking about, so it's just so SJ and looks like Ambrish Kumar know, like the approach for that would be that the K6 execution model exposes some of these iteration variables that you can use when you're choosing which row in the data file to use. But yeah, I think the answer here, since we don't have code like to show you right now, is to email support@k6.io so we can make sure we definitely get you an answer because there is a way to do it. So, Tom, I have a question for you. I don't know if well, I know that you were there at the internal meeting where Thomas showed off the XK6 browser script, right? What do you think about for this use case using protocol-based testing versus browser-based testing?
I would say you probably want to use a combination of both, really. I mean, I think it depends on what the goal is. With K6, we kind of assume that the goal is to see how something behaves under load, and so you are able to do that with just HTTP with the primary sort of use case for K6, at least these days. Adding in the browser level automation does give you those extra browser level metrics, time to first paint or whatever. There's a few others as well, and those might be influenced by load. If there's some chain of Ajax requests happening, that chain will take longer to complete, and that might actually result in a worse user experience that should come out of the browser metrics that you can capture. I think it's a performance timings object that exists in the browser that we basically have access to. And so I think in an ideal world, you would run both alongside each other. So you have just one or less than a handful of virtual users automating the browser, and but the majority of the load being generated by your HTTP scripts. And then you should see pretty similar results for the HTTP timing. So even our XK6 browser virtual user is able to capture HTTP level timings, which is something not a lot of other tools do when they're automating the browser, but we are able to gain insight into the HTTP behind the scenes. But they should match pretty closely what you would get with an HTTP virtual user. But yeah, it could be interesting to see if your browser level timings, response times increase as well as load goes up. I would imagine that it does, but yeah.
This is one of the coolest things about dog fooding. When you are your own customer, your own user, then different people also look for different things. Like I know Thomas started with the XK6 browser stuff because he's a front end developer. So he was trying to test his own work, right? And you are a load tester. And so the thing that most people go to for load is a protocol based script, which totally makes sense. It's more resource effective. But the fact that you're both able to use the same tool is really the cool thing. But I mean, why stop there? Like maybe we should have sometime like a dog fooding part 3 where we just throw chaos in or something like that.
Yeah, that might be interesting. Yeah.
And also
Coming
like
soon.
maybe accessibility at some point. Anyway, we are just at the top of the hour. Thank you, both of you, for coming. Thank you, Tom, for showing us that
Yeah,
awesome
thank
work
you.
that you've already been doing. Next week, we are going to talk about Mimir. You may have heard about Grafana Lab's new project, Mimir. Next week, we're going to have Marco Pracucci on. He is a maintainer of Grafana Mimir, and he's going to tell us how he used K6 to scale and test Mimir to like 1 billion active series. So a different kind of dog fooding. And Paul is like, we're going to have him? Sorry, this is me telling you.
Okay, I'll be there.
Yeah. I was counting on that. Well, thank you both. Naveen Kumar is already looking forward to it.
Yeah,
Thank you
it's kind
both,
of a
and
big
thank
deal.
you. Yeah, and thank you everybody who is watching this now or later, and have a good weekend.
Likewise.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.